Welcome to the Near Patients Podcast. I'm the host, Henry Wilson, and it would be amazing if you would like and share this podcast. Also, please consider subscribing on YouTube or following on Spotify for more content. This episode is brought to you by eStudio 54. I hope you enjoy. Madeline Downing, how are you today?
I'm great.
So, what is it with like the many nicknames that you have? Because I hear you go by Mad, Mad
gosh.
Dog, Madeline, Maddie.
There's definitely a lot. I don't know. My first name's Madeline. And so a lot of my family, a couple friends will call me that. And then about fourth grade, my teacher started calling me Maddie. And that was just kind of normal to me because my grandparents also called me Maddie. So I was like, all right, that's fine. And then just kind of hooked on. And then I do play softball. So I'm Downing at softball, which is hard this year because my brother also plays for baseball. So if I hear Downing, we'll both kind of look over.
That's funny. Right. Yeah, I'm imagining it's like, you know, he's on like first base at a game, and then you're just kind of, you know, watching in the stands, and you hear Downing, and you look over, and you're like, oh, that's not my.
Well, that's happened at practice before. I was like, what is that? It wasn't not for me.
Yeah, with me is that originally my name's Henry, but originally I actually went by Hank because my dad would just always call me Hank. Then in kindergarten, my kindergarten teacher, she kind of made fun of me for it, and I felt kind of bad. But she was like, "How do you spell your name?" I'm like, "Okay, Hank." She's like, "That's not your name. Are you dumb?" I'm like, "Excuse me? Are you saying that to a kindergartner?" But and then she was like, "Your name's not Hank." I'm like, "It is to me." And she's like, "Your name's Henry. You need to know how to spell that by the end of the week." I'm like, "Okay." You know, it's Henry,
yeah.
Henry. It's like, it's not that hard to spell, but then after that, I just went by Henry. But
Right.
sometimes my dad will refer to me as like Hank or some old friends.
Yeah, and I actually was just talking to my mom the other day in the car, and we were talking about how we learned how to spell our names. And I learned my first name in 3 parts. So you'd go Madeline, and that's how she learned how to spell her last name.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's kind of weird how names just kind of arise. And I think it's really cool to see how they like change over years. Like, I think a popular baby name is Noah. But when my brother and I were born, Noah was a little bit of a popular name, but it wasn't that popular. So when he was called Noah, I was like, oh, okay, that's a cool name. But now literally half the children that I see that are like 6 years old, their name is Noah. Like, that's a little much.
Yeah. I think I have so many, I guess, nicknames is what you can call them. Gosh, I have like Mads, like you said earlier, Mad Dog. I haven't been called that too many times, but definitely.
Yeah, I heard that once, and I was like, Mad Dog? You mean like Maddie or Madeline?
Right. Yeah.
Kind of crazy how that works. You see the Razorback game last night?
Yeah. I was also doing my homework at the same time. We're multitasking.
Yeah, and IB, you kind of have to do that.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, I wasn't really expecting too much out of the Razorback this year, but we did pretty well, and you know, that's better than what we have been for literally all of our sports except baseball, softball, and track for the past.
Oh, yeah. But this year we've been good in a lot of sports. I mean, besides football. But.
Yeah. Well, that's what the boosters like to pay for. But,
right.
I mean, if you're good in the
it
other
makes
sport.
the most money, so I guess it makes sense. But.
Yeah. Yeah, with the SEC, I feel like we really focus on football. And I feel like in sports in general, we really focus on football in the U.S., especially, like, you know, where we are in the States. So... You play a few sports.
Yeah, just a few.
Just a few. You play softball and volleyball. How's that?
I don't really know what you want me to say about it.
That's a good point. Normal. Yeah. Let's see. What's a good question. So which one did you start playing first, softball or volleyball?
Gosh, I actually started playing soccer in the first grade, and then I played, I want to say 6 years. I played soccer for 6 years, and then actually, I think I started basketball before that. I started basketball in like kindergarten. And then I played basketball for 9 years, volleyball for about 8, I think, 8 or 9. And then I've played softball for probably like 6. I don't know the exact numbers.
But it's about that.
I was trying to think. I was like, oh, can I do the math real quick? No, I cannot.
Me neither. No, I find it really interesting with kids is when they go, like, because it seems like they start out at a lot of sports. If you do play sports, you start out a lot. So like for me, as I played, what was the list?
Well, you played basketball, right? And
yeah,
baseball?
Basketball, baseball, soccer, football, and tennis and golf. I actually was pretty decent at golf for a while, and then I just kind of stopped playing. And then I got to swimming. So that ends up being, 7 sports if I did my math correctly. Like, it's not, and it's like I only played up until I was about, maybe 10 years old, and then it kind of weaned down over time. I find it kind of interesting with some people, they end up really liking one sport, so they like basketball and they really work at it, and then they keep playing basketball throughout high school, throughout junior high, throughout high school. Or they just end up being naturally good at one sport compared to the other, and then they just kind of like that positive feedback, and then they go through that. So with you, you started out with, playing a lot of sports. Did it end up being that you stuck with softball and volleyball because you were naturally good at it more than the other sports, or did you enjoy it more? Was it a mixture of like both?
Well, gosh, I don't remember what I was going to say. I was going to start out with something. But I don't know. I mean, I think you gravitate towards what you love. And the way that my brain works is very much volleyball. And gosh, I was thinking of the thing I was going to say, and it was great. And now it's just in one ear, out the other.
Hey, when it happens.
I know.
Well.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I remember now.
Please, yes, go ahead.
It was about 6th grade, and I played, soccer, basketball, volleyball, softball, and it was all the same season. And so I was like missing a practice for one to go to the other. I was playing games 5 nights a week. I don't know. It was insane. And so that's kind of where I had to figure out what I wanted to play and what I wanted to do, because I couldn't do it all. And I think now you don't see as many multi-sport athletes anymore compared to sort of the older generations. Like my dad played 3 sports all throughout high school, and my mom, she played 2 sports all throughout high school, and she played soccer before that too. So it's just interesting to see how much kids are being forced to choose one sport nowadays, because if you don't, and you don't give all your time and all your commitment and all your money into one sport, then you might be punished for it.
Yeah, that's something that my mom, my dad mentioned a lot. My mom, she was one of the she didn't end up doing a lot of sports. She kind of stopped like midway through high school, and my dad, he did swimming throughout high school as well. But they would always mention about how the football players from mid-August to like November, they would play football. But a lot of those football players, they're also really good at basketball. So they would play basketball during December all the way through about February, and then from March to about June or July they would play baseball, and it's like those were like the 3 main sports that people pay attention to, at least on the men's side, and they would be able to play those sports throughout. But now it seems like there's a lot more competition and a lot more people focusing to be really good at one sport compared to the others. And because of that dedication and the year-long training for that, it ends up kind of ruining a lot of the multiple sports you can play.
Right, and there wasn't year-round sports back when our parents were playing, or even the older generations. You didn't play a sport year-round, and that, I feel like, is one of the big differences, is you're expected to play year-round. I mean, they have dead weeks, but when you play club or travel ball, you're playing in those dead weeks, so you can't play school ball, but you're still playing and using those muscles, and you're using the same muscles. Whereas if you were playing multiple different sports, you're using different muscles, you're giving the other ones a rest, and it sort of mixes things up. But if you play the same sport year-round, that's when, it's going to start taking a toll on your body.
Yeah, I had the privilege to speak to an amateur boxer. I'm not sure, maybe it was a few months ago. I just happened to meet him when I was out camping, and we kind of started talking about boxing. And personally, I don't know a lot about boxing or UFC or any of the martial arts, but he mentioned that what ends up happening is that a lot of these, and this also happens like with weightlifting as well, is that um, a lot of the community ends up wanting to work so hard to get to a certain point, and they do it year round and year round, multiple years, and they work their body so much that they just burn out before they should. And what really should happen is that you train up to a certain point instead of trying to be at that point the entire year round, and then you work down, and then you don't stress out your body, because your body can handle it. It's just it can only handle it for so long. Our bodies are really adaptive. It's just when you have them at that certain physical peak for so long, where you're in the weight room 2-3 hours a day, when you're doing X, Y, and Z, you're running 10 miles. It's like that's just a lot that the body can't really strain. So I find it kind of crazy how that works.
Yeah. So you mentioned that your parents did play some sports. Is that how you kind of got into it, or? Because that's definitely, I would definitely give my parents a lot of credit for that. I mean, they were both coaches. They both were multi-sport athletes in college, at that collegiate level. And I mean, my first word was ball too, if we want to talk about that. It was as in baseball. So that's great. Every other kid, mom, dada, whatever it is. No, mine was ball.
Ball.
It's always a fun story to tell.
I think so. Noah, his first word was actually bread. Apparently, how the story goes is that one time they were eating. My dad and my mom were having, just one of those nice steak dinners that you rarely have whenever you have toddlers and infants, and they made a baguette. Just one of those you get at Walmart.
Love
and
a
then
good
Walmart.
baguette.
The thing about baguettes, we could probably talk about that later, but I love baguettes. But the baguettes you find here, like at Walmart, I think they're perfectly fine. But compared to like what you can find in France or from an actual baker who knows how to make it, not just
right. Well, I don't really tend to go to the store and I'm like, well, I just want a baguette. Well, no, I don't really do that here, but for sure, if I'm with my grandparents.
I kind of got into that stage that
bread and cheese.
Yes. I got into a stage, I think it was it was actually during the pandemic, that I asked my mom, hey mom, can you go to the store and get about 5 baguettes? And she'd be like, why? I'd be like, just get 5 baguettes. And she was awesome. She got me 5 baguettes, and it'd take me 2 weeks to eat the 5 baguettes, but I'd have some heavy hors d'oeuvres for lunch every day. It'd be like, the cheap, not necessarily, well, it'd be a nice cheddar cheese, but nothing too major. Not.
Oh, yeah. What's your favorite cheese?
Oh my gosh, what is my favorite cheese? Okay, it's Gouda.
Okay.
I really like Gouda. I've had the privilege to eat I think it was a 5-year-old aged Gouda, and when I ate it, it felt like the protein crystals. That
reminds me of Ratatouille when he eats the cheese, and then all of a sudden, he starts hallucinating.
Yeah,
I do love that movie. Sorry.
That is a great movie. That's actually one movie I cried watching, and I'm not sure why I cried. I just remember like the ending being like, oh, and they have their own little restaurant. It was a while ago. But no, I really like Gouda cheese, because if you get a nice aged Gouda, even if you don't get like an aged Gouda, if you get like a smoked Gouda that's only been, a month aged, which is hardly really anything, you still get that creamy flavor that you get with a cheddar. But with Gouda is that if you have it aged for, 2 years, 3 years, in that weird case that I had in a 5-year, it felt like you were eating caviar almost, because when you ate the cheese, like everything would just break down and melt in your mouth, and it'd just be like salty goodness.
I used to not really like cheese at all. I mean, I liked mac and cheese and certain cheese dips, but that was it. But I definitely think my taste buds have changed, which it happens. I don't know what it is, every 5 years or something that your taste buds change, but I've definitely grown to love more cheese. But I definitely think my favorite is brie.
Brie is good.
Yeah, especially baked brie, if you've ever had that.
I don't think I've ever had baked brie.
It is so good. I want it so bad.
Yeah, the
last time I had it.
The only places that I can think of that you can get some good cheese is either at Whole Foods or like the Fresh Market. And those are good cheeses, but it's like they're so freakishly expensive.
Oh yeah.
When my mom and my sister and her little contingent, I guess you can say, had a little family trip to Europe a few years ago, they went to northern Italy for a while, and they went to this little mom and pop, I'm not sure what like deli almost, and they had soppressata, which is about $10 to $15 here in the States per pound, and per kilogram it was about $4, and it tastes better than any soppressata they've had over here. And then when they told the guy who was at the counter like how much expensive, he was like, "Oh, mamma mia!" And it made it funny because it was Northern Italy. But it's amazing how expensive a lot of those aged cheeses and kind of like the stuff that you put on hors d'oeuvres is compared to it is over there.
Right. Well, it depends what country or state has certain goods and what they produce. Like in Hawaii, milk is way more expensive than it is here. That's just because they don't have cows walking around Hawaii.
Yeah, supply chains
Right.
kind of thing. So to go back to when I got into sports, so with my dad, he primarily did cross country and swimming, but primarily swimming in high school. And he wasn't. He will admit he was kind of like me. We were just maybe slightly above average when it comes to swimming. Nothing really spectacular, but he really liked swimming, and he ended up doing a lot of diving more in his 20s and 30s, like cave diving and I think it's open surface diving. And he just kind of liked being in the water. So it was very pertinent for my mom and my dad to teach Noah, my brother, my sister, and myself how to swim very early. And we all ended up swimming very well, as best you can, before the age of 2 and 2.5. So that was a really cool benefit that we had. And with my mom, she didn't really play a lot of sports. She played basketball. I think that was the last sport she actually played. And that's probably how I got into basketball, because she'd always be the basketball coach. And I got to admit, Mom, you're not the best. You're probably listening to this. You're not the best basketball player, but you're a great coach.
Don't insult your mom.
No, she's a great coach. She's not the best player, but she's a great coach.
Oh, yeah. Coaching.
My
parents are definitely the best coaches I've ever had.
Mm-hmm. I didn't know how to get rebounds for a while, and being the tallest kid on, the 5-year-old to the 5-year-old basketball team, after a while, your mom's like, I don't know, Henry, you got to get those rebounds.
Can't be scared of those 5-foot kids anymore, Henry.
Yeah. That's a little fear that I have,
But speaking of families, I've always found it so interesting how many different names there are for grandparents. It's a little random, but it's just...
Yeah, I find it interesting how in different languages what the languages are, what the names are. So like in English, you have your parents obviously, and then you have your then you have your grandparents, and then you have your great grandparents, and then your great great grandparents. Mm-hmm. But I'm not too fluent in other languages, but I know that in certain languages that are really they have a history of being very strong to the, not necessarily the nuclear family, but the wider family, that each of those rankings of grandparents or uncles or aunts have a own specific name specifically to them, and that they have a different range of powerfulness, I guess you can say, in their culture or society.
Yeah. What do you call your grandparents?
Oh, this might be a little depressing. I actually don't have any.
Really?
Yeah.
That is a little sad.
That's a little depressing. I'm fortunate
Oops, my bad.
No,
sorry.
It's fine. It's kind of weird with my family is that I don't have any grandparents, but I have a lot of like great aunts and a lot of great uncles. Yeah. So it's like they kind of fill that role to a certain extent, but most of my relatives actually live in Puerto Rico instead of living in the continental United States.
Definitely flexing that right there.
Yeah, I don't really know what happened. I'm as white as any other guy, but I think what ended up happening is that a few generations, maybe not a few generations, a few of my uncles, like maybe an uncle or two back on my mom's side, they served in the military. They were stationed in Puerto Rico. They loved the place, so they married Puerto Rican women, and then after that, they just had a really tight bond down there as the family. And that just ends up being where a lot of my relatives are. So sometimes, if I go down to Puerto Rico, I have a free house to stay in for a week or so before they get annoyed with me, which is nice. But that's about it. But no, a lot of my grandparents, they passed away before I was born, or I could remember them. But that's about it. So I'm fortunate to not have to experience that loss that a lot of people suffer yet, because I know it's going to happen, but it's just I didn't really have them around me for a while. So, but that's what happens. That's the hands. That's the cards that you've been drawn at times.
Have you ever talked to your parents about what their grandparent names might be?
Oh, like specific. Oh, I do call my great aunt that lives in Fort Smith. I call her Mimi, and that's because my mom. Her name is Maxine, but my mom could never pronounce the word Maxine. So when she would talk to her, like my mom being 4-year-old mom, she would always say, instead of Maxine, she always say Mimi, Mimi.
Well, I have a Mimi too. So
yes. So
the
then
Mimi and a Pepe.
Yeah. So then we just called her Mimi since.
Yeah, because I have Mimi and Pepe on my mom's side, and then I have a Mima and a Peepaw.
Mima and Peepaw.
Mm-hmm.
The French version and then the English version. Yeah. I'm trying to think. What else? So, yeah, going back to food. I like talking about food. What
should we talk about now?
So you like brie. What's the best brie you've ever had?
Gosh, I don't know. Baked brie is
Baked
always
brie?
the answer that I'm going to say.
Yeah. So, your mom's side of the family is French. Do you ever get a lot of that cuisine or that influence from that French side when you live?
Yeah, well, my grandfather's a chef.
Oh.
So I definitely get a lot of cuisine. That's probably my top cultural experience.
It's one of the best parts of the cultural experience, too.
It's really nice. We go out there and eat a lot of really good food.
Yeah. Food's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's definitely great.
Yeah, that's one of those things that I'm really fortunate. Well, I would say I and many people are fortunate living in the United States is that we have so many different cultures, and they bring their own foods, and every culture has their own really unique style of food, which is just it's just good. It's good because food is what connects cultures. I was watching Anthony Bourdain, one of his television shows about going around the world, and I forgot what it was called. And it was really interesting to see that this guy from the U.S. Who was a chef in the U.S. and he knew a lot of cultures, but he would go all around the world and just see how food united just people, which I think is a really unique thing to have. It's one experience that we share with people that we may not speak their language or understand them. It's the impact of the food that we eat. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah. I think it's always funny when people figure out that I'm half French. I don't know why, because it always is surprising to them, and then I don't know, it makes me less American, I guess. They're like, oh, I didn't know that. It sort of makes me less white, I guess, which doesn't make any sense because French people are white for the most part. Depends on where you're from, but I don't know. It's just an interesting reaction.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why is a lot of one of the cool things about I have to say about the U.S. again, but we have a melting pot of a lot of different cultures that we kind of bind together to be one unique American culture. It's not rare for somebody that lives in rural Kentucky to what would be Scottish or English parents to be listening to Travis Scott, which is a completely different genre of music than you would expect the bluegrass of Kentucky to listen to. Which is, I think, a really unique feature that it has. But I think very much still, that the American culture is dominated by kind of more Anglo-English influences. So maybe then when it's like, oh, you're French, you're like, whoa, that's a little different than I was expecting.
I know, and then the first question that normally comes out of people's mouths is, why didn't you tell me? And I was like, how am I supposed to, do I just slip it into the conversation? Like...
It's like every time you meet someone, it's like, hi, my name's Maddie, I'm French. It's like...
I'm just slipping into the conversation.
Yeah. But you're taking French and Spanish as a foreign language, right? Mm-hmm. How's that? Does French seem to be a little bit more difficult than Spanish, or is it a little easier because of the family that you have?
I definitely think reading and writing is easier in Spanish. It's just, you just hear it and it writes, but in French it's definitely a lot harder to write. And the grammar rules are more intense, I guess, than in Spanish. But I definitely think the hardest part is probably the cognates. And you wouldn't think that. You're like, well, it's the same in each language. But then you're like, well, I don't want to say it in French, or I don't want to say it in Spanish when I'm trying to speak in the other language.
Yeah, I could see how that could be an issue.
Yeah, and the other day, it was so funny. I was filming a Flipgrid. And I don't remember what it was about, but it was for Spanish. And then I started saying something, and I was like, that's not Spanish. I was like...
Well, our Spanish teacher speaks French as well, so...
Yeah, well, I think I was talking about a table. Because I was like, la table, and I was like, well, nope, wrong language.
La mesa.
Right, and I changed it, but it took me a second.
Yeah, that's kind of if you look at the breakdown between French compared to the other Romanic languages, is that if you were to start at Latin, Italian would be the closest at being only 9% different or so, at least according to a video that I saw, which was really informative. And then, you have Romanian and maybe Spanish and Portuguese, that's the 10 to 20% range. And then you have a few other maybe smaller Romantic languages. And then you have French, which is like, it still leans heavily towards Latin, but it has that strong Germanic influence from just the history that it's had between Germany and the Netherlands and all those countries. So you get a lot of those, you get a lot of different cognates, a lot of different words and structures than you would expect compared to maybe Italian or Spanish or Portuguese, which I think is really cool.
No, and then my biggest influence probably in language, or one of them at least, is definitely my mom. I mean, she obviously French was her first language, and then she learned English, and then she was actually a Spanish and French teacher. And so she's been trilingual since I was born. And I know she's probably listening to this, and she's like, don't tell people that. It's not as, my Spanish isn't as good anymore. It doesn't come as quickly, but she's still very good at language. And I definitely think that learning French first definitely helped. But I've always wanted to be like my mom, I think. Growing up, I'm like, man, I wish I could speak 3 languages fluently.
Yeah. And that's kind of a different thing with me, is that none of my parents, they speak a different language. But I guess at this point, effectively, my stepdad, he was in the military, and he ended up learning Russian, and then he learned Russian already with English, and I guess he's a pretty smart guy when it comes to languages. And when he spent his time in Europe, he was in Germany, so he just kind of randomly over time learned German because he just wanted to learn German.
That's the best way to learn a language.
Yeah,
just stick you in a country and you'll pick it up.
You'll figure it out eventually.
I mean, it'll happen.
And
That's
then
how we learn language.
Yeah. And then he ended up learning Serbo-Croatian through some of his time in Europe. And then, he already spoke a few languages, so the military was like, hey, you want to learn a few more languages? And he was like, sure, why not? And then he learned Arabic, and he will say that he's not fluent in Arabic whatsoever. But it's just really cool to see how somebody, I think he's now polylingual technically, but I bet if you ask him, he's like, I'm only fluent in maybe English, German, and Spanish and Russian, because it was his first 3 languages. But it's really cool how somebody can learn more than 1 or more than 2 languages, how they can learn multiple to talk to different people.
Yeah, and they say that the more you learn, the easier it gets to learn languages.
Yeah. That's, and kind of going back to what he said, is he took Spanish in high school, but he was not really good at Spanish whatsoever. But after he learned Russian, after he was in an environment where he had to learn a language, and after the multiple languages he learned, it would just be like he would just flip through a Spanish textbook and be like, oh, this makes a lot more sense. Sure, I don't really understand some of the words, or they're kind of all the way back in the back of my head, but he's able to kind of put it together. And now it's like, if he's ever in a situation, he's similar to myself, that if the person doesn't speak English, we can get around, we can kind of get our way throughout a conversation, know which directions to go, and pretty confidently. So.
And I used to know a pretty decent amount of ASL.
Really?
Yeah, I did. I watched a TV show called Switched at Birth, and I just became obsessed, and I wanted to be able to do ASL, and I wanted to be able to communicate. And I knew a pretty decent amount. I mean, it's not really there anymore.
Yeah.
But it was at one point. That was a while ago.
Yeah, when I was a lifeguard last summer, what we do as the communicate between stands, I didn't know really any more ASL than just the alphabet, but then we would spell out words and just like try to talk to each other, because it's like, it's all the way across the pool, but you can see the hand motions decently enough. So sometimes if we saw something that we thought was, people watching, it'd be like something that was just an interesting event. It's just like, to your right, and, you'd spell it out. I kind of forgot those. I'll have to study up on those before this summer. And, we just kind of look and be like, oh, that's a little weird. And then you go back to watching your lifeguarding thing. You have to be entertained one way or another.
Right. You're sitting on that stand all day.
Yeah. So I know it's about time for you having to go, but thank you for coming on to the podcast today. Hopefully we can have a longer one in the future and talk about more cheeses and languages. And
right. That's the next topic. Cheese, sports. What else do we talk about?
I don't know.
Cheese, sports, parents, grandparents.
Yeah. The most pertinent,
the most
issues
important
to
things
society.
in your life.
We don't care about politics here. We care about cheese.
No. And cheese is obviously first out of
Obviously.
all of everything else.
Of course. when you rank, it goes, your God, if you have one, your family. It's not that's not the case. That's the wrong order. It goes cheese, maybe your family.
Oh gosh, we talk too much about cheese. Now this summer, they're gonna make me eat every single kind of cheese. And I'm like, nope.
No,
I don't want to eat all of it.
Don't want to eat all the cheese.
Right.
No. All right. Well, once again, thank you for coming on, Madeline.
You're welcome.
And just a reminder to everybody listening, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider subscribing or following us on Spotify. I think that's about it. I'm going to go eat some tacos, and I hope everybody listening and yourself, Maddie, have a great rest of the day. So, see ya.